I found out from a neighbor, not my own family. And when I asked why, my aunt smiled like she'd been waiting for that question her whole life. The funeral had been 4 days ago. I was still finding black dresses in the dryer, the scent of lilies clinging to the sleeves, when Mrs. Keating from next door came by with a casserole and a whisper. They met with the lawyer yesterday. All of them. I thought you'd be there. She didn't have to say who they were. I could picture the living room of my grandfather's house, the curtains drawn, the old oak table polished for show, my Aunt Louise pouring coffee for everyone but me. I called my cousin Michael first. He didn't answer. Then my mother, who said she wasn't involved, but spoke too fast, like she was reading from a script. My ex-husband, of all people, texted me that night, heard about the will. Might be best for you to get your financial situation in order before I file for custody. That's when it hit me, whatever had happened in that room, it wasn't just about family politics. It was about survival. A grandpa wasn't a rich man in the way people think of yachts and country clubs. But he had land, 20 acres outside town, half of it still forest, half fields he'd leased to a neighbor for decades. There was the house, solid and stubborn as he was, and the workshop out back where he'd spent more hours than anywhere else. More than money, it was security. Roots. A place my son and I could always return to. And now, apparently, it had been divided without my presence, or my consent. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after my son was asleep, staring at the chipped mug Grandpa used to drink his coffee from. He'd always taken it black, no sugar. I could almost hear the scrape of his chair, the slow clearing of his throat before he said something that mattered. Paper tells the truth when people won't, he'd told me once, years ago, at the diner on Main Street. At the time, I thought he meant tax forms or receipts. Now, the phrase looped in my head like a warning I'd ignored. The next day, I drove past the law office they'd met in. The blinds were drawn. The receptionist wouldn't confirm or deny my name being on the client list. Confidential, she said, with that polite smile that means I know more than I'll ever tell you. I walked back to my car with the kind of stillness that feels like ice settling in your veins. On the way home, I took a detour past Grandpa's property. The gate was locked, a new padlock gleaming like it had been bought yesterday. I sat there in the idling car, staring at the "no trespassing" a sign that had never been there before. Louise's sedan was parked out front. Curtains twitched in the living room. I didn't get out, I didn't cry. That's something people misunderstand. Betrayal doesn't always bring tears. Sometimes it's a drought, a dry season where nothing in you moves. I drove home, made dinner for my son, and told him we'd start doing homework at the library for a while. I didn't explain why. Not yet. That night, I pulled out the one box of Grandpa's things I'd kept at my place, mementos from before he got sick. Old photos, a pocket knife, and a faded work shirt that still smelled faintly of cedar. I shook the shirt out, and something small and metallic clinked onto the table. A key. Brass, worn smooth at the edges. Tied to it with brittle string was a folded scrap of paper. 2 words, in his handwriting, workshop. Floored, I stared at it until my tea went cold. I knew the workshop. Every grandchild did. It was where he'd built our sleds in the winter, where he'd fixed furniture instead of buying new. But in the last few years, Louise had kept me away from the mess, saying Grandpa tired easily. I hadn't stepped inside since before the diagnosis. If this key was to something inside, it meant he'd hidden it from her. Hidden it for me. I tucked the key into my wallet, close enough to feel when I moved. Tomorrow, I'd find out what it opened. Tonight, I'd let the silence grow heavy enough to keep me steady, because if my family thought they'd erased me, they were about to learn the one thing Grandpa had taught me best, how to come back without warning. The burial wasn't even over when my phone buzzed in my purse. I shouldn't have looked, but habit dies slow when you've lived years waiting for bad news. The screen lit up with his name, Ethan, and one line that made the back of my throat taste like metal. Given your situation, I'll be pursuing full custody. Just a heads up. I didn't answer. I slid the phone back into my purse and pressed my hands flat over the program booklet. as if I could trap the words inside paper instead of letting them crawl under my skin. My son, Ben, was standing beside me, his small fingers laced through mine. He was trying to read the engraving on Grandpa's headstone. I kept my face still. People forget that stillness can be armor. Ethan hadn't been to the funeral. He'd sent flowers, lilies, the same kind already crowding the gravesite, with a card that said, "Condolences," from both of us. Both of us meant him. And Marissa, the paralegal he'd moved in with 2 months after our divorce papers were signed. I could picture her wording the custody text for him, a legal chess move disguised as just business. After the service, the rest of my family clustered near the reception tent. No one invited me over. They didn't have to say it, the gap they left in the circle was shaped exactly like me. My cousin Michael laughed too loud at something Louise said, the kind of laugh people use to cover discomfort. I caught my mother glancing at me and then looking away fast. It wasn't new. This was a pattern, the unspoken understanding that I was the branch you cut off so the rest of the tree could pretend it was healthy. But the timing this time was strategic. Ethan knew about the will reading. He knew I'd been excluded. And he knew the optics, financial instability, could tilt a custody judge in his favor if he moved fast that night. After Ben was in bed, I sat on the couch with the custody agreement spread out in front of me. Every clause was suddenly a tripwire. Our original arrangement had been simple: joint legal custody, primary residence with me, visitation every other weekend. But buried in the fine print were phrases like material change in circumstances and demonstrated inability to provide stable housing. The kind of language that could be twisted into a weapon if someone was motivated enough, and Ethan was nothing if not motivated when money was involved. If I lost Grandpa's property, the house, the land, my entire stability would shift. I had a steady job as a high school English teacher, but my salary wasn't built to withstand legal warfare and single-parent rent in this town. He didn't have to win outright, he just had to drain me until I couldn't fight, the key in my wallet pressed against my hip like a reminder. Grandpa had given me something, hidden it so deliberately that even Louise hadn't found it. But if whatever it unlocked was connected to the estate, I needed to move carefully. Too soon, and they'd know I had leverage. Too slow, and Ethan would file. I took a legal pad from the kitchen drawer and started a list, not of feelings, but of facts. Will reading occurred without notice to me. Ethan's custody threat tied to financial instability. Grandpa's hidden key plus note, new padlock on property gate. Louise's control of access. Facts were safe. Facts didn't dissolve under pressure. The next morning, I dropped Ben at school and drove toward the edge of town where Grandpa's land sat behind that new gate. Louise's car wasn't there. I parked a few lots down, walked the rest of the way, and let myself in through the side fence, the old section where the boards warped just enough for me to slip through. The workshop was exactly as I remembered, and nothing like it. Dust hung in the air like a slow-falling curtain. Tools were neatly lined on the pegboard, but the workbench was bare, cleared too clean. I locked the door behind me, then crouched down, running my hands over the floorboards. Grandpa had always used the same trick, a loose plank near the back wall, hidden under a rolled-up rug. The key fit the small lock in the plank's underside. The wood lifted with a sigh. Inside was a metal tin, dented at one corner. I slid it out, my fingers trembling not from fear but from the weight of the moment. Inside, 3 envelopes, thick with folded papers, a thumb drive, and a yellowed receipt from the county clerk's office with Grandpa's signature at the bottom. I didn't open anything right there. That was the difference between desperation and strategy. Desperation rips the package open in the middle of the battlefield. Strategy waits until you're behind your own walls. Back in my car, I tucked the tin under the passenger seat and drove straight home. Not to the library. Not to my lawyer, not yet. I needed to read everything first, in my own space, before anyone else knew what I had, because if Ethan was willing to weaponize a funeral, and Louise was willing to erase me from a table I had a right to sit at, then they had already written the story they wanted told. What they didn't know was that Grandpa had left me the ending. Silence has a weight. After the funeral, it pressed against the walls of my house like humidity before a storm. No calls. No visits. Not even the empty gestures, the thinking of you texts that used to show up when people wanted to feel like they'd done something. Ben moved through the rooms with that soft, careful walk kids use when they know something's wrong, but haven't been told what. I kept his routine intact: school, homework, dinner at 6, because predictability is its own form of defense. But every time the phone buzzed, I half expected it to be Ethan, doubling down on his custody threat. Or worse, a lawyer's number I didn't recognize. The tin from Grandpa's workshop sat on the kitchen counter. I hadn't opened it yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood the value of timing. In chess, something Grandpa taught me on rainy Sundays, you don't just think about your next move. You think about the one after the one. Your opponent hasn't even made yet. On the third night, the quiet shifted into something sharper. I was making tea when I caught a whiff of motor oil, faint, but unmistakable. It took me back 10 years in an instant. Grandpa bent over the hood of his truck, his flannel sleeves rolled up, his voice low as he said, "You don't win by being loud, Rachel. You win by being right, and by having the proof." The smell faded as quickly as it came, but the memory stayed. Proof. That was what was in the tin. I finally sat down at the table, pulled the tin closer, and lifted the lid. The 3 envelopes were labeled in his blocky handwriting: Louise, property, trust. The thumb drive was unmarked. The receipt was for a recorded deed, dated 18 months ago. My pulse steadied instead of racing, a strange, almost surgical calm. I started with property. Inside was a photocopy of the land title, but not the one I'd seen years ago. This one showed my name listed alongside Grandpa's as joint tenant with right of survivorship. I read it twice, tracing my own signature at the bottom, except I'd never signed it. Which meant either someone had forged it, or Grandpa had signed in my stead, using the power of attorney I'd given him back when I was in the middle of my divorce. Legally questionable, maybe. But in probate court? It could change everything. The trust envelope held bank statements. Not current ones, these were from before Grandpa's health started failing. They showed regular deposits from land leases and investment payouts. The balances then were significantly higher than what Louise had claimed in her caregiver expense a breakdown at the last family meeting I'd been allowed to attend. A margin that wide could mean siphoning, or worse, I didn't open Louise yet. That one felt like it needed gloves. Instead, I plugged the thumb drive into my laptop. It contained a single folder titled Keep. Inside were PDFs of emails, scans of checks, and something that made me sit back so fast the chair creaked: a draft will. Not the one they'd read without me. This version, dated 6 months ago, named me sole executor and primary beneficiary of both the property and the trust. No mention of Louise. No mention of Michael. Just me, and a line that read, "To ensure the care and future of my granddaughter Rachel and her son Benjamin." If this document was valid, Louise had not just excluded me. She'd actively hidden a later version of the will. In most states, that's more than unethical. It's criminal. I closed the laptop, put everything back in the tin, and slid it under the loose floorboard in my bedroom closet. Not the best hiding spot in the world, but better than leaving it in plain sight. My plan was taking shape, but it needed another piece, someone who could tell me exactly how strong my position was without tipping off the other side. Before bed, I checked my email. There was a new message from Ethan. "I'll be filing early next week. Might be better for Ben to transition while he's still young enough to adjust." No, dear Rachel. No signature. Just the same transactional coldness I'd once mistaken for confidence. I didn't reply. Not yet, because next week, by the time Ethan filed, I intended to have the kind of proof that could stop him and Louise in their tracks before the game even started. The morning after I found the draft will, I woke before sunrise. The house was still, the air cool, the kind of quiet that makes you hear the hum of the refrigerator and your own breath. Ben was asleep, his door half closed, his nightlight casting a faint blue curve on the hallway floor. I made coffee, black, the way Grandpa always drank it, and opened my notebook. It wasn't a diary. Diaries hold feelings, and feelings can be argued with. This was a ledger. Dates, names, actions. I started writing from the beginning, not of the week, but of the years leading to this. The missed calls Louise forgot to pass along when Grandpa was in the hospital. The sudden appearance of caregiver stipends on family emails. The way my mother would change the subject every time I asked about the trust. At the time, I'd thought it was awkwardness. Now I recognized it. As orchestration, halfway down the page, the pen slowed. A memory came, uninvited but sharp, the diner on Main Street, rain slicking the windows, me 24 years old and newly separated from Ethan. Grandpa had ordered 2 coffees, slid one across to me, and covered my hand with his. Paper tells the truth when people won't, he'd said, the same way some people quote scripture. I'd smiled back then, thinking he was just talking about receipts for my divorce lawyer. But the way he'd held my gaze, it was the same look you give someone when you're leaving them instructions for a future you hope never comes. I poured another coffee and opened my laptop. My search history that morning would have looked boring to anyone watching: probate laws in my state, challenging executor authority, joint tenancy survivorship rights, concealed will penalties. But each link I clicked was like pulling thread from a sweater. The more I learned, the more I saw the pattern. In my state, a valid later dated will can override an earlier one, but only if it's produced in court. If it's hidden, that's grounds for removal of the executor and, depending on intent, criminal charges. The joint tenancy document was its own weapon. If authentic, it meant Grandpa's share of the property never even entered probate, it passed directly to me upon his death. Which would make the private will reading less a legal event and more a performance for everyone but me. The key now was authentication. Bank statements could be explained away as old records. But the will and the deed? If I could prove they were genuine, Louise's house of cards would collapse. By mid-morning, I'd made my first move. I called Carol Torres, a real estate attorney I'd once coached through her daughter's college essay. We weren't close friends, but she'd always been the kind of person who remembered birthdays and sent thank you notes in actual handwriting. She picked up on the third ring. Rachel. It's been ages. I need 20 minutes of your time, I said. And I need it off the record. We met at a corner table in the library cafe. I slid the property envelope across to her, watched her eyes narrow as she read. Where did you get this? She asked finally. From my grandfather's workshop. Hidden. She tapped the date on the deed. If this was properly recorded at the county clerk's office, it's binding. The joint tenancy means the property's yours, probate can't touch it. And if it was never entered into the clerk's records? She looked at me for a long moment. Then someone might have tried to keep it that way. Which is suspicious, at best. I didn't tell her about the will yet. One step at a time. She promised to discreetly check the clerk's archive that afternoon. Driving home, I passed Ethan's SUV heading the opposite way. He didn't see me, or pretended not to. For a second, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. He had no idea that the same paper he was banking on to declare me unstable might soon prove I was untouchable. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Louise. Her voice was syrupy, the kind that sticks to your skin. Rachel, I think it's time we had a calm conversation about expectations. Call me back when you're ready to be reasonable. Reasonable. In her dictionary, that meant quiet, compliant. Absent. I deleted the message without saving it. That evening, Carol called back. It's in the record, she said. Dated and signed. You're listed as joint tenant. Rachel, this changes everything. I looked out the window at the last strip of sunset over the rooftops. The street was empty, but the quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a fuse, because now I knew my family's version of the truth wasn't just flawed. It was legally dead on arrival. Grief moves fast for the people who aren't living in it. In the first week after the funeral, my mailbox was full: sympathy cards, church pamphlets, floral arrangements I couldn't keep watered. By the second week, it was empty except for bills. By the third, even the texts stopped. What replaced them was quieter, but more poisonous, social media updates. Photos of family dinners at Grandpa's house, Louise in my grandmother's apron, Michael holding a beer in front of the oak table where the will had been read. Captions about keeping traditions alive and honoring his wishes. They were speaking to an audience that didn't include me, a chorus of likes and heart emojis from people who had no idea I'd been cut out entirely. Rent was due. My salary as a high school English teacher was steady but tight, and the months when Ethan decided to forget child support were the months I paid with my savings. I stared at the ledger in my bank app, not panicking but calculating. If I had to fight both probate and custody at the same time, it wouldn't just be exhausting, it could sink me up. That's what they were counting on. Louise had her hands on the estate. Ethan had his eyes on Ben. Both of them wanted me off balance before the first motion was even filed. I kept my replies, when I bothered to make them, short and cold. No pleading. No outrage. Just the kind of neutral that forces the other person to fill the silence with their own discomfort. I'd learned that from Grandpa too. He used to say that people who talk too much give you the shovel to bury them with the AT night. When Ben was asleep, I sat in the living room with the tin open on the coffee table. I still hadn't touched the envelope labeled Louise. I told myself it was because I wanted to be methodical, but the truth was simpler. Whatever was inside would be hard to unread. And I wanted my next move to be deliberate, not reactive. The thumb drive stayed hidden, the property deed secure, but I printed 2 copies of the draft will and sealed them in separate envelopes. One I kept in the fireproof lockbox in my closet. The other I placed in a manila folder labeled insurance policy and dropped at Carol's office without explanation. If anyone came looking, I wasn't going to be the only person holding the original. Midweek, Ethan called instead of texting. Rachel, we can do this the easy way. If you agree to modify custody voluntarily, I'll make sure you get something from the estate. I can talk to Louise. I almost laughed. You don't have that kind of influence. He paused. I know more than you think. That's nice, I said, and hung up. The next morning, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a framed photo of Grandpa and me from when I was maybe 8 years old, sitting on the porch steps with lemonade. No note, no context. I turned it over. Faintly etched on the back of the frame was a date, April 14, 2022. A few months before Grandpa's health took its last sharp turn. Whoever sent it wanted me to remember something, but I couldn't place what. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I dreamed about the workshop. Not the dusty, abandoned version I'd stepped into recently, but the way it had been when Grandpa was alive. Warm light, the smell of cedar, the hum of his old radio. In the dream, he was at the workbench, writing on a legal pad. He looked up at me and said, "When you're ready, open the one with her name." I woke up with the taste of metal in my mouth. The envelope marked Louise was still in the TINBY breakfast. I'd made up my mind. The next phase wasn't about waiting anymore. It was about knowing exactly what kind of enemy I was up against, because isolation can crush you, or it can sharpen you into something they never saw coming. The envelope marked Louise wasn't sealed. Grandpa never taped shut what he thought should be read. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, a printed email chain. At the top, Louise to an attorney named Thomas Burke, dated 2 weeks before Grandpa died. Thomas, attached is the draft we discussed. Please ensure Rachel is removed entirely. Language about her care and her son should be replaced with charitable allocation to the church building fund. I'll coordinate with Michael to get signatures at the earliest. I read it twice. My fingers steady, my jaw locked. The chain went on, Burke confirming receipt, suggesting a meeting time while she's at work. No sign-off from Grandpa. No consent. Just Louise maneuvering behind his back when he was too sick to defend himself. That was the moment the entire family narrative cracked. It wasn't just that they'd cut me out. They'd done it before he was even gone, while I was still making dinners in his kitchen, still folding his laundry. I'd thought the betrayal happened in one room on one day. In truth, it had been a long game, months in the making. I slipped the email back into the envelope and returned it to the tin. Not because I was finished with it, but because I wanted to keep it exactly as I'd found it. The original print, the timestamp, the attorney's header, all of it would be admissible if handled right. By mid-morning, I was on the county court's public records portal. I searched for Burke's filings. He was a probate specialist, representing executors in contested estates. His client list was public, but nothing linked to Grandpa yet, which meant Louise hadn't filed the modified will. Not yet. She was sitting on it, maybe hoping to wait out the statute of limitations for challenges. That told me two things: she knew the later will in my possession was real, and she was afraid it might surface at lunch. I drove to the clerk's office under the pretense of requesting a property tax history for Grandpa's land. It was a public record, no questions asked. The clerk, a woman named Jan with reading glasses on a chain, pulled the file from the back. As she flipped through, a corner of a manila folder caught my eye. The label read Hollis, Samuel, probate. Grandpa's name. Is that file open to view? I asked. She hesitated. It's not restricted yet, but the petition to appoint an executor was filed last week. Once letters of administration are issued, it'll be active. By Louise Hollis? I kept my voice neutral. Jan nodded slowly. She listed herself as sole heir. No mention of me. No mention of Ben. I thanked her, paid the copy fee, and walked out into the bright afternoon light feeling like I just stepped onto the first rung of a ladder that went higher than I could see. Louise was moving, but not as fast as she thought. The gap between her filing and her securing control was my opening. That evening, Ben worked on a science project at the kitchen table while I sorted the documents from the tin into 3 piles: immediate leverage, the joint tenancy deed, the draft will, corroboration, the bank statements, the email chain, the property tax records, unknown value, the thumb drive, the framed photo with the date etched on the back. When he went to bed, I plugged the thumb drive into my laptop again. This time opening a subfolder I hadn't noticed before: Workshop Cam. Inside were short video clips, timestamped over the last year of Grandpa's life. The angle was fixed, aimed at the workbench. Some showed him writing, others just tools, laid out in precise lines. But the last clip stopped me cold: Louise, in the workshop, holding a stack of papers, flipping through them, then sliding them into her tote bag. The date on the file was the same day Burke had emailed her back. I sat back, the glow of the screen washing the room in cold light. Grandpa hadn't just left me proof. He'd left me surveillance. Tomorrow, I'd make copies. Not to act yet, but to be ready. Because now I wasn't just holding scraps of paper. I was holding the kind of evidence that could turn the quiet game they'd been playing into a public war they couldn't win. Morning light has a way of making even ugly truths look sharper. I spread the contents of the second envelope across my kitchen table, each page weighed down with a mug or salt shaker to keep them from sliding. These weren't casual notes, they were bank ledgers printed directly from the estate account Grandpa had maintained before his decline. Side by side with Louise's caregiver expense summaries from last year, the numbers told 2 different stories. In the ledgers, withdrawals started small: cash for groceries, hardware store purchases, utility bills. But 6 months before his death, the pattern shifted. Larger sums appeared, always in even numbers: $2,500 here, $5,000 there. The memos were vague: home maintenance, special care, urgent travel. And the withdrawals always occurred within a day of deposits from Grandpa's investments or lease payments. I grabbed a pen and circled the dates. On 3 occasions, the withdrawals lined up exactly with deposits to a separate account in Louise's name, an account I'd seen on one of her Facebook brag posts, where she posted a new deck installation with the caption, "Finally, my dream backyard." That was 3 months before Grandpa passed. The POA drafts were next. One dated 2 years ago, signed and notarized, gave Louise broad authority over Grandpa's financial and medical decisions if he was incapacitated. That in itself wasn't illegal, plenty of families do it. But the second draft, dated just 9 months ago, wasn't signed. And it stripped her of nearly all authority, naming me as the replacement agent. The notes in the margin were in Grandpa's handwriting: "Rachel will act in my best interest. Louise is not to have access." If he'd tried to change it and never got the chance, that meant at the time of his death, Louise's POA was still valid. She could have moved money freely, closed accounts, even changed locks, all while wearing the mask of devoted niece. The last few pages were email printouts. One thread between Louise and a contractor was about a clearing out of the workshop and a disposing of certain items before the hospice nurse visit. Another was with Burke, the attorney, where she asked about liquidating non-essential tools and furnishings before probate. That line made my stomach turn. The workshop wasn't just wood and tools. It was where Grandpa kept his ledgers. His private papers. If she'd cleared it before I found the tin, all of this would be gone by noon. I'd photographed every page, front and back, with my phone and saved them to a cloud folder labeled Ben's College Fund, a name no one snooping through my files would ever click on without suspecting it was just tuition paperwork. Then I printed duplicates and sealed them in a plain envelope addressed to Carol. I'd learned early that the safest place for leverage is somewhere you can't be pressured to produce it immediately. On my way to the post office, I passed Louise's sedan at the grocery store. She was at the curb, loading bags into her trunk. She didn't see me, but I slowed enough to catch her expression, relaxed, almost smug. The kind of look people get when they think the checkmate is already on the board. I kept driving. Let her believe it. Every hour she spent certain of her control was an hour I could use to widen the cracks. That night, Ben and I ate dinner in the living room, a treat we reserved for Friday nights. He picked a movie. I pretended to watch while my mind mapped out the lines between every document, every email, every bank entry. Patterns don't lie. Paper tells the truth. And now I had a paper trail long enough to wrap around her version of events and strangle it. Just before bed, I checked my email. A new message from an address I didn't recognize. If you have what I think you have, don't confront her yet. She's about to make a move that will bury her without your help. No signature. No attachments. But the subject line was one word, trust. I stared at the screen, weighing the odds. If it was a bluff, responding could tip my hand. If it wasn't, someone else out there knew Louise wasn't just selfish, she was sloppy, and sloppy leaves tracks. The thumb drive had been sitting in the tin for days, but I hadn't explored all of it. Up until now, I'd opened just enough to confirm what was on it, the workshop cam videos, some PDFs of bank statements. But that anonymous email about the move Louise was about to make wouldn't leave my mind. If she was planning to bury herself, I wanted to be holding the shovel when it happened. That I plugged the drive back in, scrolled past the folders I'd already seen, and found one labeled ledger_2. Inside were spreadsheets, not bank-generated, but custom, color-coded, and dated. Each sheet tracked withdrawals from Grandpa's accounts alongside deposits into accounts with different names. Louise's was obvious, but two other account holders jumped out, Michael Hollis and a corporate entity I didn't recognize, Haven Solutions LLC. I ran the LLC name through the state's online business registry. Registered owner, Thomas Burke. The same attorney advising Louise on the will. The filing date was 3 years ago, and the address matched a P.O. box in a strip mall. That wasn't just shady. That was laundering. Digging deeper, I opened the email archive. It wasn't just Louise's messages. There were full BCC threads, blind copies Grandpa had saved before his health failed, between Louise, Burke, and Michael. One subject line read, dry run before transition. In the body, Burke had laid out a timeline transfer remaining. Estate funds into Haven Solutions, holding an account, liquidate workshop contents, preferably with no resale trail. File executor petition once Rachel is a non-factor. The date of that email was the same week I'd been in the hospital with Ben for his asthma attack. They'd moved while I was distracted, knowing I wouldn't be watching the accounts. I sat back, my stomach cold, my hands steady. This wasn't just theft. It was a coordinated removal of me, of my son, of any proof that Grandpa had intended otherwise. There was one more folder on the drive, audio. I clicked, and Grandpa's voice filled the room, scratchy but unmistakable. If you're hearing this, Rachel, it means they've tried to erase you. I didn't leave you money because of charity. I left you what's yours. Don't let them talk you out of it. And don't show your hand until you can win. The recording cut off abruptly. My eyes stayed fixed on the waveform still pulsing on screen. He'd known. Months, maybe years before this moment, he'd known exactly how Louise operated. And he'd left me the blueprint to dismantle her. I copied everything, spreadsheets, emails, audio, to an encrypted folder on a separate flash drive. Then, I disconnected my laptop from Wi-Fi entirely. I didn't trust that Louise wouldn't try some kind of remote wipe if she suspected I had her entire playbook. By late afternoon, I was at the public library, printing hard copies of the most damning documents and mailing them to my own P.O. box in a different town. Proof sent through the mail is proof with a timestamp, harder to argue, harder to fake after the fact. When I got home, there was another message from the anonymous address: watch the county notices. End of week. No other explanation. I didn't need one. If Louise was about to file something official, it would be public record, and whatever it was, I'd be ready to counter. That night, I didn't dream about Grandpa's workshop or the diner or the smell of cedar. I dreamed about courtrooms. Not chaotic ones, but quiet, the kind where the other side realizes, too late, that they've been cornered, because now the game wasn't about discovery anymore. It was about preparation, and when the day came to move, I wouldn't just step onto the board. I'd flip it. I'd been moving through the last few weeks like someone wading chest deep through cold water, breathing, functioning, but never fully warm. That morning, something shifted. Not a surge of rage or a sudden revelation. Just stillness. A clean, sharp kind that made every detail feel in focus. I pulled a fresh, spiral-bound notebook from the drawer and opened to the first page. Across the top, I wrote one word: timeline. Then I started at the beginning. January 2022, Grandpa's health starts to decline. Louise increases her caregiver role. March 2022, first unexplained $2,500 withdrawal from a state account. April 14, 2022, date etched into the photo frame. I still didn't know why, but it stayed on the list. July 2022, draft POA naming me as agent created but never signed. October 2022, email from Louise to Burke about removing me from will. December 2022, video clip of Louise taking papers from workshop. January 2023, Grandpa dies. February 2023, will reading without me. Ethan's custody threat. March 2023, executor petition filed by Louise listing herself as sole heir. Every name got a column. Every date got a dot. Every lie got a line connecting them. By the time I finished, the page looked like a map of blood vessels, each one leading back to the same heart. Louise. Grandpa's voice from the thumb drive played in my head: don't show your hand until you can win. That meant no dramatic confrontations, no emotional outbursts. My instinct was to march into Burke's office and drop the ledger on his desk. But that would give them time to adjust, to spin. What I needed was an element they couldn't prepare for: the law. By noon, I'd called a different attorney, not Carol, but someone with no ties to the family, no mutual friends. Her name was Dana Lewis, a probate litigator with a reputation for being surgical in court. When she picked up, I gave her nothing but the facts. I have a later dated will that names me sole executor and beneficiary. The current executor has concealed it. I have bank ledgers, emails, and video showing misuse of estate funds. There's also a recorded deed naming me joint tenant on the property. There was a pause, then Dana said, bring everything tomorrow morning. And don't communicate with them in the meantime. That night, I opened the Louise envelope again. Not because I needed to reread it, but because I wanted to feel that calm steel in my hands. The more I looked at her words, the more I saw what she didn't intend: the cracks. The vague phrases, the reliance on Burke, the assumption I'd never see it. I also went through Ethan's custody paperwork, pulling every receipt and record. Showing my stability, rent paid on time, Ben's medical visits, school attendance. If Ethan wanted to frame me as unstable, I'd show a judge the opposite: consistency, responsibility, proof. By midnight, the dining table was covered in labeled stacks: estate proof, custody, defense, personal assets unknown, investigate. I stood back and looked at it all, the way Grandpa used to step away from a half-built table to see if the lines were true. They were. For the first time in weeks, I felt, not safe, but certain, the fight ahead wouldn't be about convincing them I belonged at the table. It would be about removing the table from their house entirely, and I was ready to start sawing. Dana Lewis's office was on the top floor of a brick building downtown, the kind with glass doors so clean you hesitate before touching them. She greeted me herself, no receptionist, and led me into a conference room with nothing on the table but a legal pad and a glass of water. No distractions, no clutter. It felt like stepping into a surgical suite. "Show me what you've got," she said, settling into the chair across from me. I laid out the property deed first. She read it silently, tapping the date with the end of her pen. "Recorded, notarized. Joint tenancy. That's airtight. Probate doesn't even touch this. It's yours. Next, the draft will." She scanned the pages, then looked up. "Do you know if this is the last version?" "Yes. Dated 6 months before his death. No newer versions exist, unless they forged one." Her mouth curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. "If they're holding an older will and concealing this one, that's executor removal and potential criminal liability." I moved on to the ledgers, emails, and the workshop cam footage. She watched the clip of Louise sliding papers into her tote bag, pausing at mid-frame. "Where was this recorded?" "In my grandfather's workshop." "Hidden camera." "You realize this is better than a witness," she said. "Video doesn't get nervous on the stand." We ended with the thumb drive's audio file. When Grandpa's voice played, "Don't show your hand until you can win," Dana didn't flinch, but she did glance at the door, as if making sure we were still alone. When I finished, she set her pen down. "Here's the plan. First, we file a petition to remove Louise as executor based on concealment of a later dated will and misuse of estate funds. We'll request a freeze on all estate accounts pending forensic accounting. Second, we file a motion to admit your will to probate. Third, we prepare a criminal referral for the district attorney. We won't tell them when it's coming." "What about Ethan?" I asked. "We file notice of these proceedings in your custody case. Judges don't like parents who use litigation to destabilize the other's household, especially when that parent's connected to financial fraud." It was clinical. Efficient. Every step she outlined was a scalpel, not a hammer. And in that moment, I understood the difference between grief and leverage. Grief waits for fairness. Leverage makes its OWN. The time I left, the first filings were drafted, my signature ink still drying. Dana warned me not to engage with Louise or Ethan directly. Every word you give them is something they can twist. On the drive home, I stopped at the property gate. The new padlock gleamed in the afternoon sun. I didn't touch it. Instead, I took a photo, a quiet timestamp of my exclusion, one more piece for the record. That night, I packed away Grandpa's tin, the duplicate files, and the framed photo with the etched date. Everything went into a banker's box labeled school supplies and into the back of my closet. If anyone snooped, they'd have to wade through binders and art projects to find it. When I finally sat down, Ben was asleep, the house dark except for the hall light. I poured a glass of water and listened to the stillness. It wasn't the heavy silence of after the funeral. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks in your favor, because now, for the first time since this started, I wasn't chasing them. They were about to start running from me. The filings went in on a Wednesday morning, crisp pages stamped with the county court seal. Dana's paralegal handed me copies in a manila folder. "You'll want to keep these somewhere safe," she said. I almost laughed. I had more hiding spots in my house now than a smuggler. The first motion was to remove Louise as executor for concealment of a later dated will and breach of fiduciary duty. The second requested an immediate freeze on all estate accounts until a forensic accountant could review every transaction from the last 2 years. The third was a demand for production, bank statements, property inventories, correspondence with any contractors, and all versions of Grandpa's will. Dana's language was precise, almost surgical. Petitioner has come into possession of documentary, digital, and testimonial evidence indicating gross mismanagement of estate assets by the current executor, to the detriment of rightful heirs. Reading it in black and white was like seeing the story stripped of emotion, reduced to proof. By noon, the clerk had stamped the orders for service. Louise would be getting them before the weekend. I went back to work at the high school that afternoon, grading essays in the faculty lounge while my phone stayed face down beside me. I didn't need to watch it buzz to know when she'd been served. I'd feel it. Sure enough, at 4:17 p.m., my screen lit up with a voicemail notification. No message, just 10 seconds of breathing and the faint sound of a door slamming. I deleted it without listening twice. That evening, Dana called. Sheriff's office confirmed service. Also, the judge signed the temporary freeze order. She can't move a dollar until further notice. I didn't smile. Smiling felt too light for the weight of what this meant. Instead, I walked to my closet, pulled out the banker's box, and moved the framed photo to the top. If Louise wanted to know when the real fight started, it was now. The next day, I stopped by the county records office under the pretense of checking my property tax bill. Jan, the clerk, slid an updated docket across the counter. Under estate of Samuel Hollis, the status line now read, executor removal pending hearing, assets frozen. I asked, casually, if there had been any other filings that week. She flipped through the log and nodded. Your aunt filed a motion to expedite distribution. Yesterday morning? Before she was served? Looks that way. Louise had been trying to drain the accounts before I got there. She just hadn't moved fast enough. That night, Ben was sprawled on the couch with a blanket, watching cartoons. I sat beside him, my mind not on the show but on the clock. Every day the freeze held was a day she couldn't spend, hide, or reallocate. What was meant for me and my son. Dana's last instruction before hanging up had been simple: don't tip your hand on the rest of what you have until the hearing. Make her think this is all we've got. I could do that. After all, I'd been underestimated my whole life, and they were about to learn what happens when you mistake silence for surrender. 2 days after the freeze order, Dana called with an edge in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Time to pluck their wings, she said. We're issuing subpoenas. Her paralegal emailed me the draft list. Each one was a surgical strike: Bank of Millstone, complete account records for all accounts in the estate's name, plus any joint accounts with Louise Hollis, Haven Solutions LLC, formation documents, transaction records, and bank information. Link to the corporate entity, Burke and Associates, all correspondence, drafts, and invoices related to Samuel Hollis's estate, Pineview Hospice, patient records, care schedules, and visitor logs for Grandpa's final 6 months, Midwest Medical Supply, receipts for special care equipment that Louise claimed as expenses. Each subpoena was signed, sealed, and delivered through the sheriff's office by Friday afternoon. Dana explained the strategy in plain English: when you force them to produce paper, you don't just get what you're asking for. You get what they didn't mean to give you: the gaps, the overlaps, the contradictions. That night, after Ben went to bed, I went through the tin again. I rewatched the workshop cam clip, slowing it down frame by frame. At second 12, Louise's tote bag gaped just enough for me to see a flash of a red folder. When I paused the image and zoomed in, I recognized the gold-stamped logo from Burke's law office. It was proof she'd physically removed legal documents from the workshop before the will reading. I sent Dana a screenshot. Her reply was immediate: keep that safe. It's theft of estate property. Adds weight to removal motion. The next morning, the first ripple hit. Burke's office filed a motion to quash the subpoenas against them, claiming attorney-client privilege. Dana filed a counter motion pointing out that privilege doesn't apply to communications between an attorney and a non-client regarding illegal activity. It was like watching her snap a trap shut in slow motion. By Monday, Pineview Hospice confirmed they had records ready for pickup. Dana's assistant collected them, and within hours Dana called me. Visitor logs show Louise signed in multiple Times outside posted hours. Once at 2:14 a.m., the same night a $5,000 withdrawal hit the estate account. I felt the familiar stillness settle over me. This was what Grandpa meant by paper tells the truth. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a clean incision straight through the lies. That evening, Ethan texted again, "This legal stuff is going to make you look unstable in family court. Think about Ben." I stared at the screen for a long second before typing back, "I am. Every day." Then I turned the phone face down and went back to organizing the new stack of records, because every subpoena returned was another feather pulled, another inch closer to grounding them completely. And grounded birds don't fly, they fall. The probate fight wasn't the only war brewing. Ethan had been circling since the funeral, his texts shifting from casual digs to thinly veiled threats. Each one was time-stamped, saved, and printed. In chronological order. Dana's advice was clear: family court loves documentation. Judges don't care about your feelings, they care about patterns. I built him a pattern. Every "you're not stable enough for Ben" was clipped and filed. Every "I'll be filing soon" went into a binder labeled custody threats. Even his sudden, concerned parent emails to Ben's school, which I got copies of through the school secretary, went in. He was laying a narrative, and I was making sure the court saw it for what it was: calculated instability. Then there was Marissa, his paralegal girlfriend. Word travels in small towns, and I'd heard from 2 different people that she'd been explaining my legal troubles at the salon and the coffee shop. Not in a concerned tone, but with that smug lilt people use when they think they're the cleverest person in the room. I forwarded the reports to Dana, who drafted a cease and desist that was short, brutal, and designed to leave a mark. Any further dissemination of defamatory or privileged information concerning Ms. Rachel Hollis will be met with immediate legal action, including but not limited to claims for defamation per se. It was served to Marissa's office on a Thursday morning. By Friday, Ethan's texts went quiet. Meanwhile, the subpoenas had started producing results. The Bank of Millstone records showed 2 wire transfers from the estate account to Haven Solutions LLC, $15,000 each, both within 48 hours of hospice records showing Grandpa on heavy morphine. The timing was damning. Hospice logs also placed Louise on site both nights. Dana was methodical. "We'll introduce the hospice logs with the bank transfers. The visual is clean. It tells the story without us saying a word." At home, I kept my life steady for Ben. School drop-offs, homework, dinner. But under the surface, every move was deliberate. I updated my will to name a guardian for Ben if anything happened to me. I renewed my lease early, locking in stability for another year. I scheduled a full physical and had the clean bill of health notarized, a preemptive strike against any unfit mother. It claims Ethan might consider the best defense, I was learning, wasn't just proof of their wrongs. It was an unshakable record of my rights. One night, after Ben went to bed, I took the banker's box from the closet and sat on the floor with it. I went through every file, every printout, every USB. I wasn't looking for new evidence. I was reminding myself that the story they tried to write about me, unstable, absent, unworthy, had already been replaced. This wasn't about begging for a place at the table anymore. It was about making sure the table only stood if I let it, and soon, they'd realize I wasn't the one who'd been on trial. The deposition was set for a Tuesday morning in a beige conference room at Burke's office. I arrived with Dana, a stack of labeled binders under her arm. Louise was already there, wearing a tailored jacket I'd never seen her afford before Grandpa died. She greeted the court reporter like an old friend, her voice honey-sweet, her laugh rehearsed. Burke sat beside her, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, scanning me the way a man sizes up a locked door. He didn't offer a handshake. Fine by me. The first hour was standard, confirming dates, establishing her role as executor, describing her caregiver duties. Louise answered like she was auditioning for sainthood. I handled everything myself. It was exhausting. But family is family. Dana let her go on, nodding like she believed every word. Then she slid Exhibit 14 across the table, the printed email chain from the Louise envelope, the one where she instructed Burke to remove me from the will. Louise's eyes flicked down. For a second, the smile stayed. But then she saw the timestamp, the attachments, the unbroken header showing it had gone from her email account to his. That's when it happened, the microscopic shift. Her lips pressed together, her shoulders rose a fraction, the muscles in her jaw twitched. Burke objected to characterization and irrelevance. Dana didn't even glance at him. Please answer the question, Ms. Hollis. Did you write this email? Louise hesitated. The court reporter's keys clicked, filling the silence. I may have, she said finally. I don't recall every word. Dana's voice stayed even. Would seeing the original in your sent folder refresh your memory? Louise glanced at Burke. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He just looked down at his legal pad. By the time we broke for lunch, her voice had lost its polish. She stumbled over dates. She contradicted herself twice. Dana didn't press, she didn't need to. The record was already set outside, as we stepped into the parking lot. Dana handed me a copy of the reporter's log. This isn't about today, she said. It's about how she looks on paper when the judge reads this. And right now? She looks like someone with something to hide. That afternoon, an email hit my inbox, not from Dana, but from the anonymous sender who'd warned me before. She's rattled. Watch the church fundraiser this weekend. I didn't know exactly what they meant, but I knew one thing: if Louise was slipping in deposition, she might start slipping in public too, and I'd be there to see it. The church fundraiser was held in the fellowship hall, folding tables lined with pies, raffle baskets wrapped in cellophane, the smell of brewed coffee lingering in the corners. Louise was there, of course, in a floral dress and a cardigan. Working the room like a politician. She hugged parishioners, kissed cheeks, and leaned in close when she spoke. The picture of warmth. I stayed near the back, blending into a cluster of parents from Ben's school. From there, I could see her every move, every flash of her too perfect smile. She didn't see me, or pretended not to. Halfway through, I spotted Harold Givens, Grandpa's neighbor. He'd been the one to mow the backfield when Grandpa got too weak to manage it. I'd given Dana his contact information weeks ago, not expecting much. Now, he walked straight toward me, an envelope in his hand. Didn't want to send this through the mail, he said quietly. Figured you'd want it sooner. Inside was a notarized affidavit. 3 pages, neatly typed. He detailed how, in the last 2 months of Grandpa's life, Louise's car had been parked at the house after midnight on at least 7 occasions. Twice, he'd seen a man with her, not Michael. And both times, the next morning, Grandpa had been visibly weaker. Hospice logs later confirmed those were nights he'd been given higher doses of morphine. Even more damning, Harold had seen her carry boxes from the workshop to her trunk on 2 of those nights. Within 48 hours of each visit, the state account records showed cash withdrawals, $5,000, then $7,500. I folded the affidavit and slipped it into my bag without a word. The room around me was still bustling, but in my head, everything went quiet, that heavy, electric kind of quiet before lightning hits. When the raffle drawing started, I noticed something else. Louise had donated a prize, a handcrafted cedar chest. From across the room, I recognized the wood grain instantly. Grandpa had built it years ago, a wedding gift for my mother. It had sat in the workshop under a tarp since the divorce. Now, Louise was raffling it off to fund the church's new parking lot. I took a photo, time-stamped, from 3 different angles. Later that night, I emailed the affidavit and the photos to Dana. Her reply was short: this will play well in court. It's not just theft now. It's optics. And optics matter. Judges don't just rule on law, they rule on the story. They believed that Louise's story was starting to look like the kind you cross the street to avoid. The evidentiary hearing was set for a rainy Thursday afternoon. The courtroom was small, with wooden benches that creaked if you shifted your weight. Louise sat at the respondent's table, Burke beside her, shuffling papers with the kind of forced calm that comes before a storm breaks overhead. Dana started with the basics: the recorded deed, the later dated will, the bank ledgers. Burke objected to nearly everything, his voice a steady drumbeat of irrelevant and inadmissible. The judge overruled him more often than not, but the interruptions were deliberate, a way to chip away at rhythm. Then Dana nodded. To me. Ms. Hollis, please describe how you came into possession of the key and documents in question. I told it straight. Finding the key in Grandpa's shirt pocket. Unlocking the floorboard in the workshop. The tin. The envelopes. The thumb drive. I kept my tone flat, my sentences short, letting the sequence speak for itself. Burke interrupted. Again, objection, hearsay. That's when Dana turned to the clerk. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to play Exhibit 27. The clerk pressed a button, and the speaker crackled. Then Grandpa's voice filled the courtroom. Rachel, keep the key safe. It was only 5 words, but the effect was immediate. Louise's head jerked toward the table, her eyes narrowing. Burke froze mid-note. The judge's pen stopped moving. Even the court reporter looked up. Dana let the silence sit, long enough for everyone to feel the weight of it. Your Honor, she said finally, this is the decedent's voice, recorded on a device found with the same materials that included the contested will and deed. It directly corroborates my client's testimony about the origin of this evidence. Burke didn't object. For the first time all day, he didn't say a word. When I stepped down, Dana leaned toward me. That was the moment, she whispered. He knows it, too. Outside, the rain had eased into a mist. I walked to my car without looking back at the courthouse. That 5-second voicemail had done more than any stack of paper could. It had made Grandpa present in the room, undeniable, uneditable, and Louise couldn't talk her way over a dead man's voice. The order came down on a Monday morning. Dana called before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. It's official, she said. Louise is out. You're in. I sat at the kitchen table, letting the words settle like dust after an earthquake. Removed as executor, the phrase looked almost too clean on paper for the mess it represented. The judge's order was blunt. For cause, including concealment of a later-dated will, breach of fiduciary duty, and failure to disclose material financial transactions, Louise Hollis is hereby removed as executor. In her place, the court appointed me interim successor, with full authority to manage, secure, and recover estate assets. I had the legal right now to enter Grandpa's property, change locks, review every account, and initiate clawback actions for funds improperly transferred. Dana didn't waste time. First step, we notify all institutions, banks, investment firms, anyone holding estate money, that you're the point of contact. Second, we get the forensic accountant in there. Every penny moves through our eyes before it moves anywhere else. By noon, I'd signed letters of authorization and a locksmith's work order. That afternoon, I drove to Grandpa's house for the first time since the funeral. The new padlock on the gate came off in under a minute. The workshop door creaked like it remembered me. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Louise's clearing out had left gaps where tools once hung, but the bones of the place were still intact. I walked the perimeter slowly, noting what was missing, what remained. In the back corner, the cedar chest from the church fundraiser sat under a drop cloth. She hadn't managed to raffle it yet. I ran my hand over the lid, feeling the grain under my palm. The accountant arrived mid-afternoon, a quiet man named Ross who carried a leather case like it was an extension of himself. We spent hours at the dining room table, going through file drawers, shoeboxes of receipts, even the pockets of Grandpa's old jackets. By the time we left, Ross had a list of over a dozen questionable transfers and at least 3 physical assets, the chest, a set of antique tools, and a coin collection that had been earmarked for sale without my consent. Back home, I drafted an email to Ethan's attorney, attaching the court order appointing me executor. No commentary, no threats. Just the fact that his unstable ex-wife was now legally in charge of a 6-figure estate and backed by a court's full authority. At BY evening, Dana had filed the first clawback petition against Haven Solutions LLC for $30,000 in holding account transfers. Burke's name was on the paperwork as the registered agent. For months, I'd been shut out, treated like a bystander in my own family's story. Now, the keys, literal and legal, were in my hands, and I wasn't just going to open doors. I was going to lock a few behind me up permanently. It happened faster than I expected. 2 weeks after I was appointed executor, Ross, the forensic accountant, finished his preliminary report. It was a spreadsheet of cold numbers and damning patterns, wire transfers to Haven Solutions, unexplained ATM withdrawals, caregiver stipends, with no receipts, and items sold for cash without a bill of sale. The total misappropriated, $147,300. Dana filed motions for immediate restitution. She didn't ask for a hearing, she asked for a court order based on evidence so clean it didn't need argument. The judge granted it in 3 days. That's when the phone calls started. Michael, suddenly concerned about misunderstandings. Burke, trying to clarify timelines. Even Louise, leaving me a voicemail so saccharine it felt like my teeth might rot. I saved all of it. None of them got a call back. The court's restitution order required Louise and Michael to return $88,000 between them within 10 business days. Haven Solutions was ordered to release $59,300 directly to the estate account. Burke's name appeared in the compliance section, not as counsel, but as a party responsible for release of funds. Dana said it was the legal equivalent of pinning a scarlet letter to his suit jacket. The trust was corrected, too. The later dated will was admitted into probate without contest. Burke and Louise knew fighting it now would only drag their names deeper into the mud. It reinstated me as sole executor and sole beneficiary, with the explicit clause Grandpa had written, to ensure the care and future of my granddaughter Rachel and her son Benjamin. 3 days later, I checked the estate account online. There it was, a new deposit for $50,000, tagged educational fund transfer. My son's college fund. Intact. With $3,800 in accrued interest. The source was labeled restitution payment, Hollis, L. The judge, perhaps enjoying the optics as much as the law, also required Louise to read a court-approved statement into the record. The concealment of the later dated will and the mismanagement of estate funds were wrongful. These actions harmed Rachel Hollis and her son. I acknowledge my responsibility. Dana leaned over during the reading and murmured, "That's going to live in the transcript forever." When it was done, I didn't look at Louise. I didn't need to. She had just been forced to publicly undo months, maybe years, of lies in less than 30 seconds. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Ben, helping him finish his math homework. The numbers on his page blurred with the ones still scrolling in my mind: restitution totals, account balances, tuition estimates. For the first time since this started, the numbers were on my side, and they were staying there. The custody hearing was set for a Friday morning. Ethan walked in wearing a navy suit I'd never seen before, Marissa trailing a step behind with a legal pad in hand. They took seats at the respondents' table, avoiding my eyes but radiating the smug confidence of people who thought they were about to win something. Dana didn't waste time. She submitted 3 exhibits before the judge even finished the procedural opening: the court order appointing me executor and detailing Louise's removal for financial misconduct, updated financial statements, including the restitution deposits, and the reinstated trust. A bound calendar of care, a color-coded, notarized log of every school drop-off, medical appointment, extracurricular activity, and overnight Ben had spent with me in the last 2 years. The judge flipped through the calendar, pausing at the pages where Ethan's visitation weekends were marked with "cancelled, no notice" in neat red ink. Dana didn't comment on those, she let the silence do the work. Ethan's attorney tried to pivot, suggesting the probate case had destabilized my household. Dana countered with a single line: "If anything, it stabilized it, to the tune of 6 figures in secured assets and a court-validated guardianship plan." The judge looked directly at Ethan. "Do you wish to proceed with your motion for full custody?" There was a beat of hesitation, then, "No, Your Honor. We withdraw." It was anticlimactic in the best possible way. No fight, no cross-examination, just a quiet, public retreat. Before the gavel fell, Dana requested one more thing: a modification of the parenting plan to prevent future frivolous filings intended to harass or destabilize The judge granted it on the spot, adding language that required either party to show substantial evidence of endangerment before filing any new custody motions, permanent ink. No more games. Outside the courtroom, Ethan tried to catch my eye. I walked past him without slowing down. His voice followed me, "This isn't over, Rachel." But he was wrong. It was. Legally, permanently, and on the record. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, letting the quiet settle. The probate war was nearly done, the custody threat neutralized. The two fronts that had defined my last months had finally collapsed in on themselves, and now, there was only one step left. The final cut. The locksmith arrived just after sunrise. The air was crisp, the kind of morning where the sky feels too clear for what you're about to do. I stood on the porch while he worked, listening to the click and turn of metal as the old tumblers gave way to new ones. When he finished, I slipped the fresh keys into my pocket, their weight both foreign and final. Inside, the house was quiet. The cedar chest sat in the corner of the living room, the coin collection displayed neatly on the sideboard, tools back in their rightful places in the workshop. The property no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like mine, not because a judge had said so, but because I'd fought for it in a way that couldn't be undone. At the kitchen table, I wrote the letter. One paragraph, no flourishes, effective immediately. You have no legal, financial, or personal claim to any aspect of the estate of Samuel Hollis, his property, or his trust. Do not contact me or my son. Any attempt to interfere will be met with legal action. This is the last communication you will receive from me on any matter. No, dear, no, sincerely. Just my name, printed and signed. I made 3 copies, one for Louise, one for Michael, one for Burke. Each went into a plain envelope. No return address. Before leaving, I walked out to the workshop. In the far back corner, beneath the loose floorboard where the tin had been, I slid a single spare key, not to the house, but to the gate, wrapped in a strip of paper. On it, in my handwriting, paper tells the truth that it wasn't for them. It was for me. A reminder that the story had always been there, waiting for someone willing to find it. I locked the gate behind me, the new padlock clicking shut. The house stood in the morning light, solid and unshakable, and for the first time in a long time, so did I. When this began, I thought the worst part of betrayal was the moment you discovered it. The text messages. The closed doors. The chairs you weren't invited to sit in. I was wrong. The worst part is realizing how many times they tested the edges of you before they finally cut deep. How many small exclusions you brushed off as a not worth a fight. How many lies you let pass because you didn't want to be called difficult. I see it now. They'd been mapping my boundaries for years, pushing until they found the places that gave way. By the time Grandpa died, they knew exactly where to press. And for a while, they pressed without resistance, but there's a point where grief hardens into something else. For me, it was a key in a shirt pocket and a 5-second voicemail. Proof that someone had seen the storm coming and left me the tools to stand in it. Fighting back wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was paper, ink, timestamps, signatures. It was showing up to court in silence and letting the truth do the talking. It was refusing to perform my pain for the people who caused it, and in the end, it wasn't just about property, or money, or even my name in a will. It was about teaching my son that stability isn't given, it's built. That when people try to erase you, the answer isn't to beg them to remember. It's to write your name where they can't reach. I mailed the last letter. I locked the last door. And I didn't look back, because the chapter they thought they were writing about me is over, and the ending is mine.